if you are from the Ozarks, you know his name, and his work has been in National Geographic. He's been featured in the Audubon, New York Times, as well as countless other publications. And so I'm excited to say that we are joined by Mr. Tim Ernst tonight here on the podcast. So Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here. I appreciate you guys making your way all the way out here.
Absolutely.
For sure.
We're excited to be here. This is actually my first time to get to see your studio. And as imagined, it is beautiful.
Spectacular, yeah.
I'm seeing some artwork up on the walls, some photography that I have seen growing up in the Ozarks throughout my life that I recognize. So it's cool to actually get to be here at kind of ground zero.
Oh, for sure.
And also, in addition to Tim, you guys have heard from Dan, our producer Dan, a few times, but not very often do we get to have Dan on. So we've got two special guests actually. So Dan, welcome to the podcast as well.
Glad to be here.
So Tim, you know, there's a lot of ground that we want to cover with you, and really, you know, as I was thinking about putting this episode together, you've been on our list actually from early on when we started the podcast.
Your blacklist or
Yes.
The good list. And so thinking about, you know, for me personally, I've actually never heard your story from the beginning and how you came to be the Tim Ernst that a lot of Ozarkans and outdoorsmen know and respect and love the work that you do. And so that's really what I wanted to do, and just kind of ask you about your story, but also get your take and some insight on what's going on in the world of photography now and going into the future. I know we talked about that a little bit on the phone, so I think it'll be cool to dive into some of that. And for those who also like to capture the outdoors and nature with their cameras, I think they'll value your insight and your perspective on some of that stuff. So that's what I'm thinking. To start, you know, typically we interview outdoorsmen who hunt and fish, and so I don't even know if you hunt and fish. And so before we even get into the story of everything, I was just going to ask you some rapid fire questions. One, do you hunt and fish?
I used to. I grew up kind of at the edge of Fayetteville it was a very heavily wooded area, and I was the last of four kids. And by then, you know, my parents figured that I could make it on my own. They weren't needed too much anymore, and so I spent most of my days in the summertime, especially, literally running around in the woods by myself and hunting from a very early age, squirrel hunting and rabbit hunting and deer hunting. And that's kind of how I got to be fall in love with the Ozarks in particular, and the woods and wilderness in general. And my dad was always a big fisherman, so we spent a lot of time fishing. So yes, definitely hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
But back when I was growing up.
Yeah. Do you still do it now ever, or are you pretty much full-time photography and capturing the moment?
I have two really nice Orvis fly rods.
Okay.
That I bought when I was actually working in the Wind River Mountains for the Forest Service several decades ago, not quite last century, but almost. And I haven't used them in 20 years.
Really?
And they're in my van right now, getting ready to head west, and I probably won't use them again this year. So,
So you load them up and take them with you, but
I load them up and take them with me. But when I get to the counter and have to pay for an out-of-state license, it's great being a geezer in Arkansas because I got a free lifetime fishing license.
That's
here.
right.
So
after you hit 65, you're good, right? You don't have to pay for any more licenses.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I did not know that.
I did. Well,
That's awesome.
My dad he's about to turn 65 in the next couple of years, and he was like talking about that. He's like excited. He's really excited.
Well, you know, that happened for me a few years ago with the National Park Pass that used to be, it's $80 a year for anybody, gets you into entrance fee into national parks and national and federal lands, National Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management. That if they charge an entrance fee, $80 once a year, and you're good to go.
For all of them?
For all of them.
Oh,
yes.
That's cool. I didn't know
And in a lot of them, and more of them, you also get half-price camping.
Wow.
Which is really great. And,
yeah.
you know, if you have a week-long trip somewhere, that can definitely pay for that $80.
It covers it.
Well, when you hit 62, you get a lifetime one for $10.
Oh, man.
You used to. And when I was getting ready to turn 62, they were getting ready to raise that to $80. Still lifetime, but it was $80 versus 10, and they're not replaceable if you lose them or damage them. So I got mine. Actually, I bought two of them. First one I bought right after my birthday when I turned 62 at a national monument in New Mexico. And then in case I lost it, and they were getting ready to raise it to $80, I bought a second one here at Buffalo National River down Steel Creek. So, yeah.
So you're set.
I'm set. That's right.
That's awesome. I didn't know all that. That's cool. So you talked a little bit about, well, I guess I asked you if you hunt any fish. So now when you're out and you're pursuing game, it's not for the hunt, it's not for the fishing. You're out, doing photography and you're capturing that. But let's go back maybe to, you talked about growing up outside of Fayetteville, running around as a kid in the woods. At what point did all of that, like, when did you really realize that was going to turn into something that was like almost, I have to assume, somewhat of an addiction to like nature, being outside in the outdoors? At what point did that really kind of intertwine itself in your life to where you knew that this was going to be something that you wanted to do for a living?
Well, doing it for a living wasn't anything that I planned on, and I don't encourage anybody to count on that because it's really tough to do what I do for a living. And I didn't even have a camera till I was in college.
Really?
So it wasn't something that I had wanted to do, take pictures since early childhood. But I always gravitated to the outdoors, no matter what I was doing. And basically, I guess in high school, I being very shy and not happy around other people is what kind of helped me get into the outdoors and vice versa. So I remember going to Fayetteville High School, I found a good deer hunting spot about 30 minutes drive from Fayetteville.
Okay.
And it did two things because I used to bow hunt. It was a 5-month season back then. I'm not sure what it is now, starting October 1st. I deer hunt every morning before high school. Every day of class, I was out. And I only hunt for like 30 or 45 minutes, and then I'd have to come into class. So that was great, but it also got me off of the bus. I was terrified of being on a bus with people. Just being around people scared me to death. So I got to drive my car every day. And so there was an excuse to go hunting.
Yeah.
And I never really was very successful. And back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, there weren't many deer in Arkansas.
Deer around here.
But it was, but no, it wasn't really until in college I got my first camera, literally. And
where'd you get it?
My brother-in-law, who was a pilot, Air Force pilot in Vietnam, brought one back with him when he finished his service over there. So that would have been mid-1970, 74, 75, something like that. And I bought a $50 special, bought it out of a magazine, Modern Photography magazine. And it was called a Girl Watcher lens. It was a 400 millimeter lens for $50.
The Girl Watcher.
And when I got that, I remember going up in Fayetteville, the Township Hill was kind of near where I grew up. And I remember photographing a sunset from up there one day with that Girl Watcher lens. And I think that's the moment where I connected the outdoors with photography. When of course, I didn't see the pictures for weeks because it was Kodachrome slide film. But
and you had to take it somewhere to get it developed.
Sure,
and all that. Okay.
Yeah. So if there was one moment, that was that. As far as the professional part of it, when I was in college at the University of Arkansas, I actually did, I guess, the first spring break there. I decided that I wanted to hike from one end of the Ozark National Forest to the other. Oh. And I had deer hunted in a lot of that, out near Cass and Mulberry River and that area. And a few months before, when I was a senior in high school, being a Jilsted lover, my girlfriend ran off with somebody else. And my mom knew that she needed to do something about me. And I was very antisocial. And I didn't read very much.
Okay.
And she gave me a book, and I did a book report on it for senior English. Mr. Thomas was a teacher, I remember. And it literally, so this is in 1973 at age 16 or 17. It was the first book I ever read from cover to cover.
Really?
I was really good at doing book reports, reading the sleeve material inside the back cover and just copying them down word for word.
Yeah.
I was a terrible student. Still am, I think. But that book was about a guy named Ryback who backpacked. He was he was a kid kind of like me, very antisocial, and he backpacked instead of going to his high school graduation. He started on the Canadian Washington state line and backpacked to Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Down what is now the Pacific Crest Trail, which they were developing back then. A lot of it was not there, and he actually helped the Forest Service try to figure out where some of the good routes were. But that's what prompted me to want to do that here. And so in college, I wanted to hike from one end of the forest to the other, which was quite an experience for someone who didn't know what they were doing. That's seems to be a lot of the things I do in life. I do without any clue how to do it, and it takes me a few times.
You just dive in.
Just dive in. But I did that, and that was right after when I graduated from high school in 1973. I got a job with the Forest Service, which was kind of connected to Eric Ryback's book that I had read, The High Adventure of Eric Ryback. And by the way, a kid that was scared to death to talk to anybody or be in a room with anybody else. I gave that book report for my senior English class for Mr. Thomas, and he picked me to give it later, that same book report, to the entire student body.
Oh, no.
Wow.
And you talk about being mortified.
Oh,
yeah.
my gosh.
But fortunately, Eric had a lot of great quotes in his book, and I'd underlined them, and so I basically read the quotes. And
At that point, you had to read the book.
Yes, I did read the book.
You had already read it by then. but you probably went back and read it again.
Yes, and interestingly, and that literally one thing led to another, and I can point to that book for just about everything. And I now have 2 copies of that book, one of them that Eric signed for me.
Oh, wow. So you've met him.
No, I never met him.
Okay.
He's extremely secretive animal, and I've never met him, but somebody was able to track him down and got his autograph.
Man, that is cool.
To me.
That is awesome.
It's funny how that happens. It's you talked about you said your uncle gave you the camera, right? At a young age. Brother-in-law gave you the camera. And then, at that time, he probably would have never guessed that you would do anything with it if you'd even use it. And it's funny how something like that, so it seems like such a small thing can turn into such a huge part of someone's life later on and just blossom into who knows what.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
And but as far as the business end of it, it wasn't until like the second year in college. Again, I was a terrible student, and I literally answered an ad, a little bitty 3 or 4 sentence ad in the Arkansas Traveler magazine that said, "Guaranteed profits taking pictures of beautiful women."
All right.
So, of course, you read that today, it's kind of shaky.
A little sketchy there.
Yeah, but back then it wasn't, and I called the number and I talked to a guy, and it was a very legitimate thing to do, and it turned out to be, the next day I became a professional photographer and owned my own business, and it was taking party pictures of sororities and fraternity parties.
And you already had a girl watcher lens.
I already had a girl watcher lens, although that never used it for that. I think it broke on the 3rd or 4th time I used it. And so that sort of got me into the professional end of it, literally jumping from, into the fire and especially for a guy who I was just so shy. And I had dated and, I really liked girls, but I was just petrified of them. And just to be around people in general, although my summer job with the Forest Service sort of took a little bit of that, beat a little bit of that into me, because it was standing in front of 30 people at Blanchard Springs Caverns 5 times a day, leading tours down into Blanchard Springs Caverns.
Wow. Gotcha.
We just celebrated as a group of tour guides from back then, because we were the first group that the cave wasn't open at the time. And so that summer we got to literally open the cave and show it to the world. It had been in Life magazine, and I think we had 7,000 or 8,000 people the first day that we opened the doors, and which is coming up July 7th.
Cool.
Will be the 50th anniversary.
Wow.
2023. So that all kind of worked out together, and I was still petrified taking pictures of girls. And
I got to ask, what were you studying in school?
I was an environmental science major.
Okay.
And that's another story that. Working for the Forest Service was a dream job for me. And working in a cave was another dream job, because I grew up crawling around in caves, and I don't really like hot weather. And it was, 56, 57 degrees at the office all day
Pretty
long,
cool,
200
yeah.
feet underground. And I just absolutely loved that job and loved the cave and loved all the people that, and I still wasn't happy being around a lot of people, but I could talk to them because I was talking about the cave, which is something that I absolutely love. But the Forest Service really kind of instilled in me not only a love for the forest and wilderness areas and wild things, but kind of the concept of Forest Service. Their mandate is to get sustained yields of wood, water, wildlife, forest, forage, and recreation.
Okay.
And so I was really up on all those. And Smokey the Bear was, of course, Forest Service hero.
Oh, yeah.
Environmental Science 101. It was the first year, in 1973 in the fall, that they had that program at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And I signed up for Environmental Science 101. It was my first class on the first morning. And I walk in, and a very well-respected scientist, it turns out, was teaching it. And in his introduction, he said two things. Number one, and I was paying for my own college. I was still living at home at the time, but and back then it was like $20 an hour it was cheap compared to today's standards.
Sure,
but,
right.
And just coming off of a hotshot Forest Service job in the summer, I was flush with cash. But Dr. Rick Meyer was a professor, and so he said, number one, you're not going to get any credit for this 3-hour course unless you write a term paper, and that will be what your whole grade is based on.
One paper.
3 hours credit.
Wow.
And then he went on to a kind of a discussion about how Smokey the Bear was the worst thing the Forest Service had ever done.
Interesting.
And I was just sitting there shocked and steaming by the end of class. And by God, my term paper was going to be defending Smokey the Bear.
Going to prove him wrong.
And I didn't prove him wrong, but he gave me an A, I think an A+, and then he hired me to work in the Water Resources Lab as a chemical analysis guy late at night, which I was really good at. But my term paper laid out all the stuff that I'd been taught, and that we all know is Smokey the Bear. And it was Smokey the Bear campaign was immensely successful,
Right.
Always has been.
Yeah.
But because of that, it's one reason we have so much really bad wildfire seasons now.
Yeah.
And they have kind of changed their tune because we were so good at keeping fire from burning naturally, not just the man-caused ones, but the natural ones, that it was ending up being catastrophic fires where it wouldn't necessarily. And I'm kind of bouncing back and forth on that now because I do believe in controlled burns, but I don't think we need them here in Arkansas the way we do out west. Because it's just a totally different environment here, and I've gotten into trouble with Forest Service friends sometimes over that. But controlled burns are good with proper size and in their place and regularity, but not as now. They used to light them by hand with drip torches in smaller acreages, and they really were controlled burns these days. Sometimes they light them with ping pong balls filled with gasoline shot out of a helicopter, and they can light up really big areas.
Oh, thousands of acres.
Yes, and it sometimes causes problems with those of us that have trouble breathing and a few other things. But anyway, but so Dr. Meyer was absolutely correct, and he was kind of leaning forward, and had the vision of. Whereas I didn't have the vision, I had the vision of the past that I was taught. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a pretty. Even now, there's some people who still don't know the impact that Smokey the Bear had. We've kind of been talking about that through talking with different people who are biologists. We talked with a quail biologist from Quail Forever in Arkansas. He was talking about the benefits of burning and how historically the state of Arkansas, the Ozarks, would burn. Literally hundreds of years ago, every 4 to 5 years in its entirety, and so how that's changed the landscape of all that stuff, and so even now, that's kind of like people are coming around to this idea that wow, Smokey the Bear had like a big impact in a negative way in a lot of cases. And so
Exactly.
for him to be talking about that in the 70s, 80s was
1973.
pretty forward thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was.
So then at what point, talk to me then, so you became a professional photographer, shooting photography for sorority girls. At what point did that change into an outdoor pursuit?
Well, the more I did that, and I took on a business partner, Philly Zell, and our business was Photographs Unlimited, and we had 15, 20, 25 part-time photographers that would go out to shoot parties at night during the week, and but we also did weddings and portraits. We had a studio, and 4 or 5 years into it, we even the lab, the photo finishing lab, is what drove this, and they had people, guys like us, on campuses all over the United States that were sending. And we didn't work for this lab, which was in Oklahoma City. They simply processed our film.
Okay.
And they had a very unique way of doing it and turning it around very fast and putting titles on everything and doing it in color overnight. Mm-hmm. Color proofs we would deliver to the sororities and fraternities, and prints only took a few days, and they were very, very mildly priced. But towards the end of that, I was spending more and more time being out in the woods and doing other things, and my partner saw that, and he got married and kind of needed more income than half of our income was, and so he came to me with a buyout proposal, and it was the right time. So he bought me out, and I financed it for him so that I didn't have to have a job for several years. Mm. And that was a critical component of what I was doing, because I had been taking nature photographs, but not really professionally, and not really trying to, as a freelance photographer, because I had my day and my night job taking sorority pictures. Sure. And so that very first summer, after I'd sold him the business, I decided to take a photography workshop by a guy who turned out to be a wonderful mentor of mine, Boyd Norton. He's from Colorado, and at that time he had just he had written done all these books and been given awards by Robert Redford and lots of people, and he was we hit it off really well in the wilds of Wyoming. It's the first time I'd ever been to Wyoming, and I ended up going to several more workshops with him, and literally down the road a few years was an assistant of his teaching underwater photography workshops in the Virgin Islands.
Oh,
which
cool.
was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, I had no idea that you did that.
Yeah, it was, and it's kind of funny because the first one of them I did was in 1980. Of the Virgin Island workshops, going forward a few years. And I was backpacking across the United States with a group of hikers that were going from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, called Hike a Nation, which kind of figures in pretty dramatically with what I do now, and the some much bigger things than that happened in Arkansas. And when we got to the Appalachian Trail, I had to excuse myself and took one of the other hikers with me and flew to the Virgin Islands and was on sailboats and sail yachts for a couple of weeks down there, and then came back and rejoined the group at Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and we hiked down the C&O Canal on into Washington, D.C., and they closed off 3 lanes of Pennsylvania Avenue, and we had a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Oh, no. Grimy backpackers that had been on the trail for almost 13 months.
Bunch of granola hikers.
Exactly. But one of the guys leading us was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, or not Peace Prize, but for chemistry. And it was a really, really, really big deal. And there were several thousand people, I think, on that whole thing. And we were supposed to end on the steps of the Capitol, and which we did. We got to the steps of the Capitol, and all the congressmen and senators were coming out, and all the TV coverage and everything. And then all of a sudden, someone got up to the microphone and said, "The Pope has just been shot.
Oh, wow.
Everything's canceled."
Yeah.
So,
oh my goodness.
What year was that?
That was in May of 1981. And so we went ahead, and our actual final destination was the Washington Monument. And that was kind of a downer, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
But while we're in Washington, everybody visited their own their representatives from their states and whatnot. And the purpose of that trip was the main purpose was to try and promote hiking and backpacking as a form of recreation and exercise. And we'd been through the waffle stomper stage, and John Denver, bless his heart, who really besides Eric Ryback, I give John Denver the credit for partly for me getting out and do it, but also kind of the big push for people to kind of, it was okay to, wear waffle stompers to school and college and, get out, and backpacks were just becoming more popular. But it was mainly...
Do you know what a waffle stomper is?
It's like a flip-flop type of thing, right?
No, it's a hiking boot.
Oh, is it?
A waffle stomper
never heard
being
that term.
Vibram soles.
Oh, okay.
Waffle.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the hiking shoes we used to wear back then weighed like 5 pounds a piece, and they had these big, you had to wear them a month to break them in.
Yeah.
But
I know who John Denver is.
I know John Denver. I didn't. The term waffle stomper is new to me.
Yeah. That's and that led to other things at the University of Arkansas with me also. But the main emphasis for that hike was to promote construction of new hiking trails, and for the locals to get out and start hiking. And part of the deal was that from, I don't know what the final mileage count was, but most of the distance, I forget what the exact miles was, but the group hiked through 13 states. And we kind of had to talk them into hiking detour and hike through Arkansas. And we had just, the Forest Service had started building the Ozark Highlands Trail in pieces. They didn't tell anybody about it. I'm kind of getting down the road here a little bit, but they working for the Forest Service at the cave, and coming from my Eric Ryback experience, and my brother and I helped found the Outdoor Recreation Center at the University of Arkansas in the mid '70s, which we rented. In fact, just this past weekend, we had the 50th anniversary of the Pack Rat Outdoor Center coming into business in Fayetteville. And I had dinner the night before that with the one of the founding people, Carolyn Crook. Carolyn and her husband Scott started it, and the conversation that my brother had with them to get 4 canoes, so that we could, what we did at the Outdoor Rec Center was we rented gear to students.
Oh, yeah.
And my brother and 2 or 3 other guys would teach canoeing classes and rappelling classes, and I would teach hiking classes. I had done one hike in my life, and, I knew everything there was because I read Eric's book. Colin Fletcher's book was our textbook, but it was a chance to expose students to this stuff, and we would actually go out on hikes and take canoe trips and do rock climbing trips and whatnot. I think the Outdoor Rec Center is still around, but at any rate, Hiking Nation was a big push to get all that going, and as a result of, specifically in Arkansas, when the group came through in the winter of 1980, there was only a few bits and pieces of the Ozark Highlands Trail completed, and we walked every step of what was completed. And after the group got through, and I had been meeting regularly with the Forest Service and other land managing agencies in Arkansas through what's called the Arkansas Trails Council, which was different land managing agencies that own land where trails of all kinds were located or might be located. But they didn't have many users of the trails attend those meetings, except this guy right here was there because I was wearing a green suit. And as a result of Hiking Nation coming through, it's kind of funny when I told them about it and said, we're going to have 50 backpackers and we want to hike on part of the trail. They said, no, you can't do that. You can't handle that many people.
Oh, they were worried about the impact of
They were
too many
worried
people.
about the impact. They said, you'd have to do an environmental assessment of it, hire someone to do all this. And I said, you're nuts.
Yeah.
You're just crazy.
It's 50 people.
I said, I tell you what, and they had no experience of building or maintaining recreational trails in the Ozark National Forest on a backpacking trail level anyway. And they may have had the people there, but they didn't really have that experience of that. So I said, tell you what, you come with us on the first hike, on the first section, and you walk at the end, and you tell me what the impact is. And if we're tearing the trail up, and we'll walk roads, which is what we did most of the way across the United States, was back roads.
Okay.
Because there weren't very many trails.
Sure.
And I never heard another word from them.
Yeah.
And
He must have thought y'all were putting cleats on the bottom of your waffle stoppers.
there you go.
Yeah.
But that fall, in September of 1981, at the Forest Service blessing, I called a meeting of interested hikers in Fayetteville, because by then they had dropped construction of the trail, and it was literally going to be grown over within 2 or 3 years, and nobody knew about it anyway because there wasn't social media, there were no guidebooks or maps. So 50 people showed up at that first meeting, and with the sole purpose of completing the Ozark Highlands Trail.
Oh, cool.
And so that was kind of the emphasis for it. That got it all started. So that's why Hiking Nation had such a huge impact.
It's so,
and it's been like that in many other places in the United States also, not just here.
It's so weird now because hiking is such a huge part of Northwest Arkansas. Like, I used to go on hikes with my dad all the time. To think that at one point you had to convince people to do it. And I have friends who move here like in college from Texas, and they're like, let's go on all these trails, because they don't really have them down there. It's really way too hot.
Different. Yeah.
And so to think that at one point the trail was being overgrown and people weren't using it is kind of mind-blowing. But
that people didn't even know about
yeah,
it.
people were like, hiking? That's nothing. Now it's like, that's why people, like, part of the reason people move to Northwest Arkansas is to go and experience all this stuff. So it's really cool.
That's right.
Yeah. So then I'm curious then how. So you were spending more and more time. You were doing outdoor photography. Talk to me about some of the early days of doing outdoor photography. You know, you financed out. You're part of the business, but doing outdoor photography and just making a living off of that. What were some of the challenges you ran into starting your own business, doing photography in those early days? Well,
fortunately, that very first workshop I went to in Wyoming with Boyd Norton, you know, he got a sense that what I was doing was pretty good, and he'd never heard much about Arkansas. And I still had the book that he signed, one of his books he signed to me that time, and he said, good luck with your Arkansas project. And what he told me was, photograph what you know. You know, don't go to Spain and go to the Tetons. And actually, I did go to the Tetons during the workshop and got really neat pictures, but never sold any of them. And so that really drove it home with me. And I had a very, very few, very lucky things happen to me early on in those first several years of my photography career. And one of them is that I had met Matt Bradley, who was teaching a workshop. He's the guy who had the original National Geographic article about the Buffalo River. He was the photographer for that.
Matt Bradley.
And a lot of the iconic pictures we know of the Buffalo River were Matt's.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, just this last week at the gallery here, we became an input location for the restoration of Granny Henderson's cabin, which so many people know about and have visited over the decades now that we just surpassed 50 years of the Buffalo National River. And she became an icon because of Matt Bradley's picture of her in National Geographic. And now we're trying to collect $20,000 to kind of protect her old cabin, which is, well, it's a real famous cabin in the Buffalo River area. But Matt had me come.
That's not the white cabin that I've seen pictures of.
No, that's actually a church. That's
okay.
a church over there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a lot smaller than that. It's on the, if you go to Hemden Hollow the long way, you go past her cabin. But she just has an incredible story that, you know, it towers 10 times more than anything I've ever done, and who she was and the way she lived and stayed on the land as long as she could. And of course the Park Service took over all the property there, and she eventually was moved out. But Matt had me come and be a kind of a guest speaker teacher at his Ponca workshop that he used to do at the very early Buffalo Outdoor Center.
Yeah.
And we got to know each other, and he was doing some project for National Geographic, and he said, I don't have these kind of pictures. Have you got them? And I said, well, I got a few maybe. And they published 3 or 4 of them. And so I was literally within the first year, I was a National Geographic.
That's crazy.
Had been published by National Geographic. And, you can't imagine how many doors that opens.
Yeah, sure.
And just a lot of other things that happened that were just really, really lucky. It turns out that one of Boyd's, another workshop of his that I went to, one of the participants was the photo editor of Audubon magazine. And I spent almost an entire night with her in a hot tub in Colorado at that workshop. And strictly platonic, but making a personal connection.
Right.
And we got along very well. And also the executive editor of Audubon magazine, I met at another workshop, and those two worked together very closely. And guess what? I got not a bunch of, and they were never really big, but National Geographic or Audubon Society magazine pictures of mine were published as a result of that.
And that's early on. You're saying that's pretty
very early
on in your career.
Yes. And but one of the biggest obstacles was Arkansas. I mean, there was Matt's National Geographic article about the Buffalo River. Life magazine published about Blanchard Springs Caverns. But even to this day, so many people think Arkansas.
Yeah.
Why would I want to go hike in Arkansas?
Yeah.
Why would I? And there's nothing to see there. And that was kind of the reputation that a photographer from here was really struggling to fight against. And even though, they published a lot of stuff of mine in national publications, it actually was probably a good thing that there really weren't nature photographers, professional nature photographers in Arkansas. I was a very tiny fish in a tiny pond.
Yeah.
Or I was a fish in a real tiny pond here. There wasn't really much competition.
You were kind of the only fish in the pond for a little bit.
Not the only. And I mean, there's Neil Compton was a photographer, and Ken Smith was a photographer, and of course Matt Bradley. But Matt, while he's probably one of the best that's ever been at nature photography, he was mainly a commercial photographer.
Okay.
and kind of did his thing. And in my early years, because of him and because of Ken Smith and Neil Compton and those guys, I actually wouldn't come over here to the Buffalo River when I'd go out to take pictures. I stayed away from here because I was kind of, that's theirs. They've already done that, and
Felt like it was their turf a little bit.
Yeah. And I certainly could never do anything to that would come anywhere close to what they've already done. And so I tended to go to other places in the state where nobody ever taken pictures of.
Yeah.
And still do that as much as I can. But I'll never forget one day somebody from the Natural History magazine in New York City called me up one day and said, do you have a picture of this? It's an extremely rare wildflower that is only found in very few places, and one of them is Natural Bridge, Allen Cove Natural Bridge in the National Forest near here. I said, do you have any pictures of that? I did. I didn't know I did, but I did. I mean, I had taken pictures over there. One of those places nobody ever heard of, and you're not going to see in the newspaper much. And boom, I got published by Natural History magazine. And I asked her, I said, why'd you call me? She said, well, we have a map of the United States, and we got all these photographers listed. They're known nature photographers. And she said, you're the only one for Arkansas, so we called you. And I wanted a million shot. I had it.
Yeah.
And they never published anything else of mine, but that was pretty big credit. In very early on, this was actually, I think, just when I was getting started as a freelance photographer. A buddy of mine who's a geologist was working in Billings, Montana. We'd worked together at the cave for the Forest Service, and we decided to go to Alaska. So I drove to. I was waiting around for Mount St. Helens to blow. And I thought, man, I need to go out there and sit and wait on that.
Yeah, just in case.
And I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't be here. But I picked him up in Billings, and along the way we drove through the ash cloud. It had blown.
Yeah.
And so, but we drove on up day and night. It seemed like 3 or 4 days driving. And there were several things that happened there. We spent almost a month there. And I was taking pictures. He was just a geologist. And on the way back, we took the inside passage ferry instead of driving all the way back, and we were just two poor kids, and well, he wasn't. He's a geologist, but I was a starving freelancer, and so we didn't have bedrooms, cabins, so we just kind of hung out on the deck, and I got deathly ill from, I think, eating some Dolly Varden trout that I'd caught a bunch of the night before and cooked. And
Back on those Orvis fly rods you still have?
no, that was before I couldn't afford Orvis. It's probably a cane pole at that time.
True, yeah.
But I got sick to death and got up and ran to the back of the big ferry and was throwing up over the back.
Oh no.
I was, and not to mention being on water. That's probably part of it.
Yeah, seriously.
And I looked up and I thought, oh my God. I ran and got my camera and took a picture that became the cover of the largest selling calendar in the world a couple of years later. From Alaska,
really?
Getting a picture published from Alaska. And it was just because I got sick and was throwing up. I would have never seen it otherwise.
Happened to be there.
And it was a real neat picture. But I don't sell pictures from Alaska.
Yeah, that's
and I've spent a lot of my career going other places and taking pictures, and people don't buy my pictures that are not from Arkansas. So it was kind of a double-edged sword in that, I was just a fish, and there weren't really a lot of other fish. And so Arkansas Times Magazine published a bunch of pictures of mine over a number of years, and recently, kind of the version of that, Arkansas Living Magazine had done quite a bit. And so Boyd's words have always been true. Photograph what you know in your backyard. And in fact, one of my 20 picture books is called In My Own Backyard. Mm-hmm. And in that picture book, I literally got out a map from where we lived in our log cabin near Hawksbill Crag and went out 10 miles and drew a circle around it. And I wanted to do the whole book with pictures that I'd taken from within that circle.
Oh, cool.
I ended up having to go 12 miles because there were a couple things I really wanted to get in there.
Really include
and so,
it, yeah.
And it's just amazing that just right here in the Ozarks, there was so much diversity of scenery and obviously topography and the different scenes and whatnot, but there's just so many different things here to photograph. And to me, over the years, it seems like it's very easy for me to take pictures here. Mm-hmm. It just seems, of course, part of that is, countless people come in and say, oh, I was there and I can't ever get pictures that look like that. And, oh, you must process them and, do all this and all that. And it's like, well, I was there 45 minutes before sunrise. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It looks a lot different then.
Yeah.
I was there when it was pouring rain. There's a lot more color when it's raining.
Yep.
And, you crawled back under the bluff and just like a lot of the nighttime pictures I've taken have been the things that you don't see that in the middle of the day.
You just don't.
So, and it's doesn't really have much to do with skill or, cause I'm basically self-taught. What Boyd Norton taught me was really more about the business of photography and not so much about the ABCs. The ABCs of photography really it's not difficult. And, these days, the most difficult thing about taking nature pictures is to try and forget most of the things that are on the camera because you don't need them and they'll just confuse you. And, iPhone take a better picture than I've been able to take for the last 40, 50 years.
That's crazy to hear you say that.
With just one button without thinking about it.
Yeah.
At any rate, how do we get off on that?
Well, I was going to ask you, so you're talking about taking pictures of what you know. That's kind of sounds like some advice that you were given that's rang true in your life and has just become a part of obviously what you've done. And I think a lot of people would credit you. I know I certainly would for showing places in the Ozarks in Arkansas that really, I would say a lot of people either didn't know about or maybe few people knew about, and highlighting them, putting them on display, and going against what you said earlier about people, the stigma of Arkansas. Why would you want to photograph there? Why would you want to go and hike there? And so really it was like you were kind of proving them wrong and showing, here's where I'm from, here's what I love. And in a way, I think that's really cool. But I'm curious, was part of that coming from a place of I want to show this off or I want to protect this? Is there a little bit of a balance of like, I don't want to show this place because then too many people will know about it. So if I highlight this too much, then it may get destroyed. Like, where do you find that balance of conservation, highlighting something, featuring something, but also protecting it?
Well, I don't know. It's difficult to have a balance. And my philosophy has always been is that, and this comes partially from working to help establish wilderness areas. The Arkansas Wilderness Act in 1984, what led up to that was years and years of a lot of work by a lot of people to highlight areas that needed protection or that would be the best areas to protect and that would be good for Arkansas and good for the country to protect these areas. And it's just sort of a natural progression on two different trains that kind of came together. That actually, I'll go back to Eric Ryback's book that I read in high school, and to the when I did the hike across the United States. I didn't do the whole hike. I did about half of it with them, but Hike a Nation, and then starting the Ozark Highlands Trail Club. And there was something that happened like the second year in 1983, starting that club as we were building the trail. I had always, when I was out west or wherever I was, where there were trails, most of the documentation on them was terrible. And Park Service and Forest Service maps and signs out on they were wrong. They were just simply wrong.
Just dead wrong.
And coming from somebody who was building a trail, and we started the club, none of us knew how to build a hiking trail. And this was kind of, I think, one thing that made us so successful, the Ozark Highlands Trail Association, was that we were hikers who wanted to go from here to there. And we wanted to do it and see the best things that we could. And we learned how to build, how to construct the trail. The Forest Service didn't know how to build trail here. And they were still very young in that. And we didn't either. And they provided the tools to us, and they said, here it is, go do it. And so the Ozark Highlands Trail was designed, was laid out and built by people that are going to use it. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why it's such a good trail. And it was voted by Backpacker Magazine one of the top 10 most scenic trails in the United States at one time, which was just enormous.
Yeah, it's huge.
But in 1983, just 2 years after we started the organization, I had wanted to, because we had over half the trail built in, but there wasn't any way to tell people about it. There was no social media. Newspaper articles were great, but so I sat down and got together with a lady, Sally Rader is her name, and we drew a map of kind of the vision of the trail from end to end, all the way across the national forest, and then filled in which parts of the trail were completed and did a little elevation profile section by section. And then I wrote a very short description of it with the mileages and all that. And I published a map as the first thing that I'd ever published. And I paid Sally, who did a spectacular job on that map. And then I got them printed in Springdale. And I literally sold them at one store, the Pack Rat Outdoor Center.
No way.
That was the beginning. And at some point in 1983, and I think I had updated the map a second time as we had done some more. I probably only got a couple hundred printed. And I was still just in my third year being a freelance nature photographer, and I queried Backpacker Magazine about who was also one of the founding groups behind the Hike a Nation thing.
Okay.
And I said, hey, we're building this trail here in Arkansas, and the Hike a Nation voted it as their most favorite state and came back for their first year reunion. Would you like to see a feature article about it? I can do the pictures.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. We expect your article to be so many words and blah, blah, blah. And I said, so that is when I started to write. I wrote my first article was to Backpacker Magazine, supplied them with pictures. This is a national magazine.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And I knew that.
For your first article.
Yes. The most important part of anything is, literally the lead in, the first sentence. So I thought, I'm sure they're going to change that. So I put something really silly on it. Well, they bought it. And it was a feature article in the September 1983 version of the only national backpacking magazine, Backpacker. And they changed everything in the article except for the first part.
Oh, my
which was
goodness.
kind of funny. It talked about Ma and Pa Kettle, which was something I was trying not to do, but at any rate. Well, so at the very end of that article, which was great to begin with, the fact that we had this national exposure and international exposure was they let me put in, I think it's the only article that at that level where that's there, for a map of this trail, send $4 to Tim Ernst, 411 Patricia Lane, Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Oh, they added that in there.
They added that in. I got over 10,000 orders.
No way.
I'd only printed 100 maps, but it was real easy to get them
Yeah.
reprinted. So, and the biggest deal about that is I wish I would have charged $5 instead of $4. But with the map that I mailed back to them with their check, it was so much fun going to the mailbox every day and seeing literally stacks of envelopes, each with a $4 check in them. But with the map, I put an Ozark Highlands Trail Association membership form.
Smart.
And that, I don't know how many people we had at the time, but they were mostly all locals, some from surrounding states. But within the next year to 2 years, we had grown to like members in 30 states.
Yeah.
They were not only paying yearly dues, but they were coming to Arkansas to hike.
Right.
And most importantly, they would come here to help build the trail and help maintain it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
a lot of them still do. And so that's kind of coming full circle. When you build a trail, I think it's better to have somebody who uses the trail build it.
Right.
And I think it's great to have them maintain it, because maintenance is actually more important than building the trail even.
Yeah.
I mean, as we know, when I published my Arkansas Waterfalls guidebook in first one in 2002, most of the waterfalls didn't have names to begin with, and very few of them had trails to them. So a lot of them were just, bushwhacking.
Sure.
And now there's really well beat down trails to a lot of those.
Yeah.
And so we can build trails with our feet, but we can't maintain them that way. So it's good. And kind of going back around to the original question you asked a couple hours ago, we need people out on our hiking trails in order to keep them open. And the only way to do that is to have people out on them. When I was going, and of course for me, once we got the trail basically complete to the Buffalo River, then everybody wanted a guidebook version of the maps.
Right.
And so I did my first guidebook in 1988, the Ozark Highlands Trail Guide. And that is actually sort of a parallel universe of mine that started was the publishing business with that map. And then onto the guidebooks. And then there was a Buffalo River, there were Buffalo River trails that had been built. So they needed a Buffalo River guidebook. And then, there are more trails being built in Arkansas. So Arkansas hiking trails. And the Ouachita Trail actually was built before the Ozark Highlands Trail, but nobody maintained it. There was no group that, the Forest Service built that entirely either by using their workers or youth groups. There were not really volunteers used that I'm aware of to design and build that trail. And there wasn't anybody using it because nobody knew about it. Jim Rollins from Little Rock wrote a guidebook to it and finally got some people out using it, but still it wasn't really enough. And so one of my guidebooks later on was for the Ouachita Trail. But it wasn't until after that one came out that the trail still was in pretty disrepair because nobody was maintaining it.
Yeah.
And there was a volunteer organization that kind of grew out of the Ouachita Mountain Hikers group that was using the trail. And now the Friends of the Ouachita Trail that's the volunteer group that has really spearheaded the efforts to keep that trail open, and they've done an incredible job with it, like the Ozark Highlands Trail Association has done. And two examples of how we need public boots on the ground in order to keep these trails open and going. Now, as far as the picture side of it, I think that when I worked on the Wilderness Bill and got to testify before Congress, and which was a lot of fun.
Most people don't say that's a lot of fun, I feel like.
Yeah.
Well, they're probably testifying because they were called to testify.
For a different reason.
Yes, that's right. But and just also working, and one of the early things I did with the Forest Service, and it kind of put me in as a mole, I think, because I was Forest Service, but I was working with the Sierra Club, kind of on opposite sides of this, because the Forest Service didn't really want a lot of wilderness areas because it was, that took away a lot of the things in their multiple use that they're mandated to do by Congress, and particularly lumber production. But recreation is one of those, but part of what I did was to, for the Forest Service, they actually gave me aerial maps and topo maps. And they had little bitty X's with numbers all over a map, like of, say, the Richland Creek, what is now the Richland Creek Wilderness Area, or the Hurricane Creek Wilderness Area. And they'd say, okay, and they had the list, and they would say sawmill, waterfall, bluff, something that was either a scenic thing or a human scar. Because wilderness areas aren't supposed to have, human impact, although... Let's face it, all of Arkansas has been cut over.
Sure. And
everything that's out there is multi times growth, trees and whatnot. But perfect example of how, number one, some of the old timers actually, they didn't really destroy the land like maybe we think they did. They were pretty good caretakers of it. And the other thing is that it will come back, as you're talking about trees. And that's the Upper Buffalo Wilderness Area in that picture right there, one of our most beautiful wilderness areas. And that's probably been cut over 4 or 5 times. It was totally clear cut, back at the turn of the previous century.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it's come back, and all of our wilderness areas were completely denuded over, and since people have been here. And now there are sacred places. So. But I realized that in order to get people that didn't really care that much about that to end up on the side of that, you needed to give them a reason. And so, and I kind of consider this one of my overwhelming jobs that I do, that I've just been given myself to do, is to promote the great beauty of what we've got here in Arkansas in particular, to the point so that people will appreciate it. And not only just appreciate what we've got, but probably more importantly, appreciate what we don't have and what we might need to protect in the future.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about a big wilderness area. It might just be a green space in your neighborhood. If people don't get out there and enjoy it, they're not going to appreciate.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't need another park.
Yeah, right.
In fact, it's kind of funny. There was Judy Collins or somebody from the '60s had a song about we don't need another mountain. We'd like to protect the ones that we got.
The ones we got.
So and I've continued to do that, not only on the local level, but people know a little bit more about Arkansas now, and it's a destination for people to come hike. And of course, fishing and hunting, it always has been.
Sure.
Because that's where most of the publicity's been. But until we got trails and the Waterfalls guidebook, probably more than any other guidebook of mine, it's just amazing how many people that you meet out or come through here, and they're from South Dakota or from Oregon or from New Jersey, and
wow.
I didn't know y'all had waterfalls here.
Yeah.
And and they've got 80 of them marked off on their book, and there's 200 of them that they have yet to go to, and it's just, and so I think that probably because of the fact that we've been known for so long as a backwards country with nothing here, and they come here, and it is just spectacular, and yes, the pictures are one of the big reasons they come here, but if we didn't have people interested in the beauty of what we've got here, I don't there'd be condominiums.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that makes me sick to even think about.
And I got nothing against condominiums, but there are places for those, and there are places for the great scenic beauty that we have here. And I think that we can strike a balance. And we can never protect enough, but yet we're an exploding society,
Absolutely.
And probably always will be. And Newton County here is a perfect example of that. It wasn't just a few years ago that land was dirt cheap, and it's been 50 years since the Buffalo National River has been established, but for a long time it really didn't have much of an impact, and now it is having much more of an impact, and financially it's been really good for the economy, depending on which side of the coin you're on, but with that comes people.
Sure.
Yeah.
And right now, we're kind of lacking in infrastructure. And if it isn't, I mean, I'm kind of an advocate for, yes, we want people. I mean, this belongs to everybody, and that's why we have it, so
Right.
that people can come and enjoy it. And we're not at the level of crowding like Yosemite or Yellowstone or Smoky Mountain National Park. I personally don't think we ever will be, simply because we're too far away. You got to work harder to get here than you do those places. California. I mean, Yosemite's really great, but man, I'd kind of hate to go there right now. It's just so crowded.
So many people.
But the Buffalo River area, Hawksbill Crag, of course, is one of the most famous landmarks, natural landmarks in the state. Last 6 or 8 times I've been there, I never saw anybody else.
Really?
Yeah. If you go on a Sunday afternoon, you're going to see a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I know people can't get off work and go in the middle of the week, but there are certainly better times to go there than, on a weekend. Buffalo River is like that. It gets really, really crowded, especially on weekends sometimes. But go over there. The river's, more than 150 miles long, and there's places you can go and never see a person all day.
Yeah.
So it's kind of and some people need other people around them. I've also realized that. I'm not one of them, but I think we have enough National Forest Service property, the National Park Service property, and state parks, and I don't mean enough of them in that we don't need more land, but there's enough public land out there to where you don't have to go where everybody else is to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I don't think there will ever be, just by the nature of wilderness, is we're not going to build a highway through that scene in the middle of the Buffalo River Wilderness.
Right.
I mean, it's mandated by law. It's not going to happen,
Yeah.
Unless we have far worse things going on in our lives. So you'll always be able to walk out into the middle of that and never see another person.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why places are like that. And so I think Arkansas has a real good balance to some degree of backcountry to crowds of people. But I think that it needs to be managed. And Newton County is a perfect example of that. If it's not managed correctly, then it's going to be, people are not going to want to come here. And that'll kind of, undo a lot of the things that's happened. One example at Yellowstone National Park, I mean, it literally is a zoo, not necessarily of animals, but of people in the summertime. It's like 95% of the park, nobody ever goes into during the year. Same thing with Yosemite. The backcountry in Yosemite, you just hardly ever see anybody. Now, John Muir Trail is very popular and, places like that. But if you're comfortable getting off, and that's how I do most of my hiking is I mean, people don't want to follow me because it's some pretty difficult places.
You're bushwhacking quite a bit.
Yeah, lots of bushwhacking. Or hiking at, especially in the summertime, it's pretty hot, can be hot and miserable in Arkansas, but if you get out at 5 o'clock in the morning when it's starting to get light, it's just, the air is sweet and cool, and wildlife is just waking up, and you're not going to see anybody else out there.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's as good a hiking as any place else, I think. In fact, I think spring and fall in Arkansas, I've said this for a long time, are two of the best seasons of anywhere. Spring always, fall is more hit or miss here, and I've photographed fall in many, many places. And when we're on, it can be just spectacular here.
Yeah.